Welcome back to Shocking Stories, where we uncover the most mind-bending true crime cases that challenge everything you think you know about justice, identity, and the bonds between family members. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a case that will make you question the very foundation of our legal system and the lengths some people will go to protect themselves, even if it means destroying their own flesh and blood. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear involves the ultimate betrayal between identical twins, a murder that shook a small Michigan town, and a decade-long fight for justice that would expose one of the most twisted schemes in criminal history. This is the story of Sarah and Emma Whitmore, identical twins born just 3 minutes apart in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in 1995. To the outside world, they were mirror images of each other. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same petite frame, and the same infectious smile that could light up any room. But beneath their identical appearances lay two completely different souls, and on a cold November night in 2018, those differences would lead to murder, betrayal, and one of the most shocking cases of mistaken identity ever documented. Picture this. It's 11:47 p.m. on November 15th, 2018, in the quiet suburb of Kentwood, Michigan. The Whitmore family home on Maple Street sits dark and silent, or so it should have been. But inside the modest two-story house where Sarah and Emma had grown up, a nightmare was unfolding that would tear their family apart forever. David Whitmore, the twins' 52-year-old father and a respected high school principal, lay dead in his home office, brutally stabbed 17 times with a kitchen knife. The murder was savage, personal, and filled with a rage that suggested the killer knew their victim intimately. Blood splattered the walls, family photos lay shattered on the floor, and the murder weapon, a butcher knife from the Whitmore family's own kitchen, was found discarded in the backyard. It was one of the most brutal crime scenes I'd encountered in 25 years of police work, recalled Detective Michael Chun of the Kent County Sheriff's Department, who was the first investigator on scene. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a random act of violence. Someone had killed David Whitmore with extreme prejudice, and the level of violence suggested a very personal motive. But who would want to kill David Whitmore? By all accounts, he was a beloved educator who had dedicated his life to helping students succeed. He was active in his church, coached Little League baseball, and had no known enemies. His wife Linda had died of cancer 2 years earlier, leaving David to raise his twin daughters alone. Daughters who were now 23 years old and trying to build their own independent lives. The investigation took a shocking turn when detectives discovered that both Sarah and Emma had been at the family home on the night of the murder. Sarah lived in the basement apartment that David had converted for her after college, while Emma had supposedly been staying overnight to help sort through their late mother's belongings, a project the family had been working on for months. When we arrived at the scene, both daughters were present and appeared to be in shock, Detective Chin explained. Sarah was the one who called 911, saying she had heard screaming and found her father's body. Emma was found in the kitchen, apparently having just discovered the scene herself. Both young women were covered in blood, both were hysterical, and both claimed to have no idea who could have done such a thing. But as the investigation progressed, a disturbing picture began to emerge of the relationship between David Whitmore and his daughters. Despite his public image as a caring father and educator, David had apparently been struggling with alcohol abuse since his wife's death, and his relationship with his twins had become increasingly strained. Neighbors reported frequent shouting matches coming from the Whitmore house, especially in the months leading up to the murder, Detective Chin revealed. David had become controlling and emotionally abusive, particularly toward Emma, who had been trying to move out and start her own life. There had been several domestic disturbance calls to the house, though no formal charges were ever filed. The twins themselves painted a complex picture of their father during police interviews. Both admitted that David had become difficult to live with since Linda's death, that he had been drinking heavily, and that he had become increasingly possessive and controlling of their activities. Dad changed completely after Mom died, Sarah told investigators through tears. He became paranoid, jealous, and would fly into rages over the smallest things. He didn't want us to have boyfriends, didn't want us to move out, didn't want us to have lives separate from him. It was like he was trying to keep us prisoners in our own home. Emma's account was similar, but more detailed. She described David as becoming emotionally abusive and manipulative, using guilt about their mother's death to control their behavior. She revealed that she had been secretly planning to move to California with her boyfriend, a plan that had infuriated David when he discovered it. Dad threatened to cut me off completely if I moved to California, Emma told police. He said I was betraying Mom's memory, that I was being selfish and ungrateful. The night he died, we had a huge fight about it. He was drunk and screaming, saying terrible things about Mom and about me. I went to my room crying, and that's the last time I saw him alive. But which twin was telling the truth? And more importantly, which twin had finally snapped and decided that murder was the only way to escape their father's control? The physical evidence at the crime scene was frustratingly inconclusive. Both twins had David's blood on their clothing. Sarah from discovering the body and attempting to perform CPR. Emma from, according to her story, rushing to help when she heard Sarah screaming. Both had access to the murder weapon, both had opportunity, and both had motive based on their father's increasingly abusive behavior. This was an investigator's nightmare, Detective Chin admitted. We had two identical suspects with identical access, identical opportunity, and identical motive. The physical evidence couldn't distinguish between them, and their stories were consistent enough that we couldn't immediately identify which one was lying. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered something that would change everything about the case. A secret that one of the twins had been hiding from her family, her sister, and law enforcement. A secret so explosive that it provided a clear motive for murder. What do you think that secret was? Drop your theories in the comments below, because what investigators found would expose a web of lies, betrayal, and sibling rivalry that had been building for years beneath the surface of what appeared to be a loving twin relationship. The secret belonged to Emma Whitmore, and it involved far more than just a planned move to California. Hidden in Emma's bedroom, investigators found evidence of a double life that she had been living for over a year, a life that included drug dealing, theft, and a relationship with a violent criminal who was wanted by federal authorities. Emma had been stealing money from her father for months to support a methamphetamine addiction that she had successfully hidden from her family. She had also been selling drugs to college students in the Grand Rapids area, using her clean-cut appearance and her father's reputation to avoid suspicion from law enforcement. Emma had been living a complete lie, Detective Chin revealed. On the surface, she was a college graduate working part-time at a bookstore and helping care for her widower father. In reality, she was a drug addict and dealer who had gotten involved with some very dangerous people. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages between Emma and her boyfriend, Marcus Thompson, a convicted felon with outstanding warrants for armed robbery and drug trafficking. The messages, recovered from Emma's phone, revealed that Marcus had been pressuring Emma to steal more money from David, and that he had threatened violence if she didn't comply. Marcus was planning to rob the Whitmore house, Detective Chin explained. The text messages showed that Emma had been providing him with information about David's schedule, the layout of the house, and where David kept his valuables. Emma was supposed to make sure the house was empty when Marcus broke in, but something went wrong that night. The final text message from Emma to Marcus, sent at 11:23 p.m. on the night of the murder, was chilling. Dad's home. He caught me in his office. Everything's gone wrong. I can't let him call the police. I'm sorry, but here's where the case took its most shocking turn. a turn that would expose the depths of sibling betrayal and challenge everything investigators thought they knew about the Whitmore twins. When Emma was confronted with the text message evidence and the discovery of her secret drug activities, she didn't deny her involvement in the planned burglary. Instead, she made a confession that stunned investigators and changed the entire trajectory of the case. "It wasn't me," Emma told Detective Chin during her interrogation. "I know what the evidence looks like, I know what the text messages say, but I didn't kill my father. Sarah did." According to Emma's explosive confession, Sarah had discovered Emma's secret life weeks before the murder and had been blackmailing her own sister, threatening to expose her drug dealing and relationship with Marcus unless Emma shared the money she was stealing from their father. "Sarah knew about everything," Emma claimed. "She knew about Marcus, she knew about the drugs, she knew about the money I was taking from Dad. But instead of trying to help me or convince me to get clean, she saw an opportunity to benefit from my crimes." Emma alleged that Sarah had been the one to suggest the burglary plan, and that Sarah had been the one communicating with Marcus using Emma's phone to avoid leaving a digital trail that could be traced back to her. "Sarah was always the smarter one, the more manipulative one," Emma continued. "She convinced Marcus that she was me, handled all the planning, and was supposed to be the one to keep Dad out of the house that night. When Dad came home early and caught us in his office, Sarah panicked and stabbed him. Then she made me help her clean up and stage the scene to make it look like a burglary gone wrong." But Detective Chin wasn't buying Emma's story. The physical evidence, the text messages, and Emma's own admissions about her drug involvement all pointed to her guilt. Emma's attempt to blame her identical twin seemed like a desperate ploy to avoid responsibility for a murder that had clearly been the result of her own criminal activities. Emma was caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence of her guilt, Detective Chin concluded. Her attempt to blame Sarah was just another lie from someone who had been lying to everyone in her life for over a year. The evidence was clear. Emma Whitmore had murdered her father to prevent him from exposing her crimes and destroying her relationship with Marcus Thompson. Emma Whitmore was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit burglary, and multiple drug-related offenses. Her trial began 8 months later, in July 2019, and the prosecution presented what appeared to be an airtight case based on the text messages, physical evidence, and Emma's secret criminal activities. Sarah Whitmore testified against her twin sister, tearfully describing how she had discovered Emma's drug use and criminal behavior, but had been too afraid to confront her or tell their father. Sarah painted a picture of Emma as someone who had become increasingly desperate and violent as her secret life spiraled out of control. "Emma wasn't the sister I grew up with anymore," Sarah told the jury through tears. "The drugs had changed her, made her paranoid and aggressive. I was afraid of what she might do if I tried to stop her or expose her activities. I never imagined she would hurt Dad, but looking back, I can see that she was capable of anything." The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Emma Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of her father, with additional sentences for her drug-related crimes. "Justice has been served for David Whitmore," prosecutor Jennifer Walsh said after the verdict. Emma Whitmore chose drugs and criminal activity over her family, and when her father threatened to expose her crimes, she chose murder over facing the consequences of her actions. But as Emma was led away to begin her life sentence, she maintained her innocence and continued to claim that Sarah was the real killer. "This isn't over," Emma shouted to reporters as she was escorted from the courthouse. "The truth will come out someday, and when it does, everyone will know that my sister destroyed our family and let me take the blame." For 10 years, Emma Whitmore sat in the Michigan Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility, filing appeal after appeal and maintaining her innocence while Sarah built a new life as the surviving daughter of a murder victim. Like this video if you're as intrigued by this twin mystery as I am, and let me know in the comments whether you think Emma was telling the truth about Sarah being the real killer. Don't forget to subscribe because in part 2, we're going to reveal how new DNA evidence exposed one of the most elaborate cases of sibling betrayal in criminal history, and show you why identical twins aren't as identical as everyone believes. The truth about the Whitmore sisters will leave you speechless. Welcome back to Shocking Stories. When we left off, Emma Whitmore had been serving a life sentence for 10 years for the murder of her father David, while maintaining her innocence and claiming that her identical twin sister Sarah was the real killer. What happened next would revolutionize how forensic science approaches identical twin cases and expose a conspiracy so twisted that it would shake the Michigan criminal justice system to its core. The breakthrough that would change everything began not with Emma's case, but with advances in DNA testing technology that were being developed by Dr. Lisa Chun at the University of Michigan's Forensic Science Laboratory. Dr. Chun had been working on methods to distinguish between identical twins using DNA analysis, a holy grail of forensic science that had previously been considered impossible. Identical twins share 99.9% of their DNA, which has always made it impossible to tell them apart using traditional forensic methods, Dr. Chun explained. But recent advances in genetic sequencing have allowed us to identify tiny variations called somatic mutations that occur after birth and can be unique to each twin. The technique, called ultra-deep sequencing, could detect genetic differences between identical twins that occurred due to environmental factors, lifestyle choices, and random cellular mutations that accumulate over a person's lifetime. While the differences were incredibly small, they were detectable with the right technology and could potentially be used to distinguish between identical twins in criminal cases. Dr. Chun had been looking for cold cases to test her new methodology when she came across the Whitmore murder file. The case was perfect for her research: 2 identical twins, physical evidence that could contain DNA from both sisters, and enough time elapsed for somatic mutations to have developed differently in each twin. The Whitmore case offered an ideal opportunity to test whether our new sequencing technology could retrospectively identify which twin was present at a crime scene. Dr. Chun continued. If we could successfully distinguish between Sarah and Emma's DNA using evidence from the crime scene, it would validate our methodology and potentially solve a decade-old question about which sister was actually guilty. But Dr. Chen's interest in the case went beyond scientific validation. She had been following Emma's appeals and had become convinced that there were unanswered questions about the original investigation that deserved further examination. Emma's story had never made complete sense to me, Dr. Chun admitted. Her claimed motive, preventing her father from exposing her drug dealing, was relatively minor compared to the extreme violence of the murder. And her behavior after the crime didn't match what we typically see from perpetrators who kill family members in moments of panic. With the approval of the Michigan Innocence Project and the Kent County Prosecutor's Office, Dr. Chun began the painstaking process of reanalyzing DNA evidence from the Whitmore crime scene using her new ultra-deep sequencing technology. The evidence included blood samples from the murder weapon, skin cells found under David Whitmore's fingernails, and hair follicles recovered from the crime scene. Traditional DNA analysis had been unable to distinguish between the twins, but Dr. Chen's advanced techniques would look for the tiny genetic differences that had accumulated in each twin over their 23 years of life. What Dr. Chen discovered would not only exonerate Emma Whitmore, but would expose Sarah as a master manipulator who had committed the perfect crime by framing her identical twin sister. The results of the ultra-deep sequencing were conclusive and shocking. The DNA evidence from the murder weapon, from David's fingernails, and from several other crime scene samples all matched Sarah Whitmore, not Emma. More importantly, Emma's DNA was barely present at the crime scene beyond what would be expected from someone who lived in the house and had discovered her father's body. The evidence was overwhelming, Dr. Chen revealed. Sarah's DNA was all over the murder weapon, and the crime scene in patterns consistent with her being the perpetrator. Emma's DNA was present only in locations and quantities consistent with her story about discovering the body and attempting to help her father. But how had Sarah managed to fool investigators for 10 years? How had she convinced a jury to convict her innocent sister while she walked free? The answer lay in a deception so sophisticated and cruel that it challenged everything experts thought they knew about sibling relationships and criminal manipulation. The reinvestigation that followed Dr. Chen's DNA findings revealed that Sarah Whitmore had been planning to frame Emma for their father's murder for months before the crime actually occurred. Sarah had discovered Emma's drug use and relationship with Marcus Thompson, but instead of trying to help her sister, she had seen an opportunity to solve what she viewed as the Emma problem permanently. Sarah had always been jealous of Emma, revealed Dr. Patricia Moore, a forensic psychologist who was brought in to analyze the case. Despite being identical twins, Emma was more outgoing, more popular, and had been their father's favorite. Sarah harbored deep resentment toward her sister that had been building for years. The new investigation uncovered evidence that Sarah had been systematically sabotaging Emma's life while positioning herself as the good twin who was trying to help their troubled sister. Sarah had been the one to introduce Emma to drugs, had encouraged her relationship with Marcus Thompson, and had even helped plan some of Emma's criminal activities, all while secretly documenting everything to use as evidence against her sister later. Sarah was playing a long game, Dr. Moore continued. She was creating a narrative where Emma was the troubled, drug-addicted twin who was capable of violence, while she was the responsible, caring sister who was trying to help. When the time came to commit murder, she had already established the perfect cover story. The reinvestigation also revealed that Sarah had been the one communicating with Marcus Thompson using Emma's phone, just as Emma had claimed during her original trial. But Sarah hadn't been planning a burglary. She had been manipulating Marcus into believing that Emma wanted him to rob the house, creating a motive and a fall guy for the murder she was planning to commit. Sarah used Marcus as an unwitting accomplice, Detective Chen explained when the case was reopened. She convinced him that Emma was planning the burglary and needed his help, then used his involvement as evidence of Emma's criminal activities and motive for murder. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation was that Sarah had been physically and psychologically abusing Emma for months before the murder, using Emma's drug addiction to control and manipulate her. Sarah had been supplying Emma with drugs while threatening to expose her to their father, creating a cycle of dependency and fear that made Emma completely vulnerable to Sarah's manipulation. Sarah had turned Emma into her puppet, Dr. Moore observed. Emma was so afraid of exposure and so dependent on Sarah for drugs that she would do whatever Sarah told her to do. On the night of the murder, Emma was essentially Sarah's captive accomplice, too terrified and drug-dependent to resist or escape. The night of David Whitmore's murder had unfolded very differently than prosecutors had argued at Emma's trial. According to the new evidence, Sarah had convinced Emma to help her stage a fake burglary to steal money from their father's safe. Emma, who was high and desperate for more drugs, had agreed to help without understanding Sarah's true intentions. But when David came home early and caught them in his office, Sarah hadn't panicked. She had seen the perfect opportunity to execute the murder she had been planning for months. Sarah had stabbed their father 17 times while Emma watched in horror, too shocked and drugged to intervene or escape. After the murder, Sarah had forced Emma to help clean up the crime scene and had coached her on what to tell police when they arrived. Sarah had also planted additional evidence to support her story that Emma was the killer, including placing the murder weapon where Emma's fingerprints would be found and ensuring that Emma was covered in more of their father's blood. Sarah orchestrated every detail of the cover-up, Detective Chin revealed. She positioned herself as the innocent twin who had discovered the crime, while making sure that all the physical evidence would point to Emma as the perpetrator. The reinvestigation also uncovered evidence that Sarah had been planning to kill Emma after their father's murder to eliminate the only witness who could expose her crime. Emma's drug overdose 3 days after David's death, which had been attributed to grief and stress, was actually a failed murder attempt by Sarah. Sarah had given Emma a lethal dose of fentanyl mixed with her regular methamphetamine, toxicology expert Dr. Robert Kim revealed. Emma survived only because she had built up a tolerance to opiates through her drug use. If she had died as Sarah intended, Sarah would have been the sole survivor of the family with a clear inheritance and no witnesses to her crimes. But why had Emma never told the complete truth about Sarah's involvement? The answer lay in the sophisticated psychological manipulation that Sarah had used to control her sister for years. Emma was suffering from what we now recognize as trauma bonding with her abuser, Dr. Moore explained. Despite everything Sarah had done to her, Emma still felt dependent on and loyal to her sister. Emma was also convinced that no one would believe her if she accused the good twin of being the real killer. Emma's attempted accusation of Sarah during her original trial had been dismissed by investigators and prosecutors who saw it as a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. But the psychological evidence suggested that Emma had been telling the truth all along. She just hadn't been able to articulate the full extent of Sarah's manipulation and control. The DNA evidence also revealed another shocking truth. Sarah had been present at other crime scenes over the past 10 years, using her identical appearance to Emma to commit additional crimes while her sister was safely locked away in prison. Sarah had been using Emma's identity to commit fraud, theft, and other crimes, Detective Chin revealed. Whenever she was caught on surveillance or identified by witnesses, the evidence would point to Emma Whitmore, who had an airtight alibi because she was in prison. The scope of Sarah's crimes extended far beyond her father's murder. She had been using Emma's identity to commit credit fraud, had stolen thousands of dollars from their father's estate, and had even used Emma's name to start romantic relationships with men she eventually robbed and manipulated. Sarah had essentially stolen Emma's entire identity and used it as a cover for a decade-long crime spree, Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh admitted during a press conference. Emma Whitmore wasn't just wrongfully convicted of murder. She was being framed for crimes committed by her sister, even while she sat in prison. The revelation that Emma had been innocent all along sent shockwaves through the Michigan criminal justice system and raised serious questions about how the original investigation had gone so wrong. This case exposed fundamental flaws in how we investigate crimes involving identical twins, admitted Kent County Sheriff Michael Torres. We relied too heavily on physical evidence that couldn't distinguish between the sisters, and we didn't adequately consider the possibility that one twin might be manipulating the other. The case also highlighted the limitations of the criminal justice system when dealing with sophisticated psychological manipulation and abuse between family members. Sarah Whitmore committed what may be the perfect crime, reflected Dr. Moore. She used her identical appearance, her superior manipulative skills, and the justice system's inability to distinguish between twins to frame her sister for murder while positioning herself as the innocent victim. As Part 2 of our investigation concludes, the wheels of justice were finally beginning to turn in Emma's favor. But reversing a decade-old murder conviction would require more than just DNA evidence. It would require prosecutors to admit they had been completely wrong about one of their most high-profile cases. Don't miss Part 3, where we'll reveal how Emma was finally exonerated, what happened when Sarah was confronted with the new evidence, and how this case changed the way law enforcement investigates crimes involving identical twins. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because the conclusion of the Whitmore sisters' story will show you just how far someone will go to destroy their own family, and how the truth can finally emerge even after years of lies and deception. What do you think should happen to Sarah now that the truth has been revealed? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share this video to help spread awareness about wrongful convictions and the power of new forensic technology to right old wrongs. Welcome back to the shocking conclusion of our investigation into the Whitmore twins case. When we left off, new DNA evidence had proven that Emma Whitmore was innocent of her father's murder and that her identical twin sister Sarah was the real killer. But overturning a decade-old murder conviction would require more than scientific evidence. It would require confronting a killer who had spent 10 years perfecting her lies and building a new life on the foundation of her sister's destroyed future. The legal process of exonerating Emma Whitmore began immediately after Dr. Lisa Chen's DNA results were verified by independent laboratories. The Michigan Innocence Project, led by attorney David Martinez, filed emergency motions to halt Emma's sentence and demand a new investigation into her case. The DNA evidence was unambiguous. Martinez explained during a press conference that shocked the legal community. Emma Whitmore has spent 10 years in prison for a crime that was actually committed by her identical twin sister. This represents one of the most egregious cases of wrongful conviction in Michigan history, and we demand immediate action to correct this injustice. But overturning Emma's conviction wouldn't be as simple as presenting new evidence. The legal system moves slowly, especially when admitting such a fundamental error in a high-profile murder case. Prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement officials who had been involved in the original case were reluctant to acknowledge that they had been completely wrong about one of their most celebrated convictions. Nobody wanted to admit that we had sent an innocent woman to prison for 10 years while her sister walked free, admitted former prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, who had originally secured Emma's conviction. The DNA evidence was compelling, but it meant acknowledging that our entire case had been built on false assumptions and manipulated evidence. Meanwhile, Sarah Whitmore had built a new life for herself as the surviving victim of the Whitmore family tragedy. She had inherited her father's estate, had become a spokesperson for victims' rights organizations, and had even written a memoir about surviving her sister's crime and rebuilding her life after losing both her father and her twin. Sarah had turned her deception into a career, observed Dr. Patricia Moore, the forensic psychologist analyzing the case. She was making money from speaking engagements, book sales, and victim advocacy work, all while knowing that her innocent sister was rotting in prison for crimes Sarah had committed. But Sarah's carefully constructed facade was about to crumble as investigators began re-examining every aspect of her life since David's murder. What they discovered was a decade-long pattern of manipulation, fraud, and criminal activity that had been hidden behind Sarah's image as a grieving victim. The investigation revealed that Sarah had been systematically stealing from her father's estate, using Emma's identity to commit fraud, and manipulating romantic partners for financial gain. She had also been in contact with Marcus Thompson, her father's murderer, maintaining a relationship with the man she had used as an unwitting accomplice in framing her sister. Sarah had never stopped being a criminal, Detective Michael Chin revealed. She had just gotten better at hiding her crimes and using other people to commit them for her. The murder of her father wasn't the end of her criminal career. It was the beginning of a more sophisticated and profitable one. The most damning evidence came from Sarah's own communications, recovered from electronic devices seized during the reinvestigation. Text messages, emails, and social media posts revealed that Sarah had been boasting to friends about getting away with the perfect crime, and had even joked about her stupid sister taking the blame for murders she didn't commit. "I can't believe how easy it was," Sarah had written to a friend in 2025. "Everyone was so ready to believe that Emma was the killer because of her drug problems. I just had to play the grieving sister and let the evidence speak for itself. The best part is that Emma will never get out, so I'll never have to worry about her exposing me." But perhaps the most shocking discovery was that Sarah had been planning to kill Emma even before their father's murder. Phone records and financial documents showed that Sarah had been researching ways to murder her sister and make it look like a suicide or overdose, viewing Emma as an obstacle to inheriting their family's wealth and starting a new life. Sarah didn't just frame Emma for their father's murder, Dr. Moore explained. She had been planning to eliminate Emma entirely as part of a long-term scheme to take control of the family assets and create a new identity for herself as the sole survivor of a tragic family. The failed overdose attempt after David's murder had been just the first of several attempts Sarah had made to kill Emma. Sarah had also tried to arrange for Emma to be murdered in prison, contacting inmates and offering money to anyone who would kill her sister and make it look like a prison fight or suicide. Sarah was obsessed with making sure Emma could never expose her crimes, Detective Chin revealed. She had been actively trying to have Emma killed for 10 years, viewing her sister's continued existence as a threat to her freedom and her carefully constructed new life. Armed with overwhelming evidence of Sarah's guilt and Emma's innocence, Michigan Attorney General Patricia Wilson announced that the state would not oppose Emma's immediate release from prison and would begin the process of officially exonerating her. "The evidence is clear and compelling," Wilson said during a press conference. "Emma Whitmore is innocent of her father's murder and has been wrongfully imprisoned for 10 years. We are taking immediate action to correct this injustice and ensure that the real killer is brought to justice." Emma's release from prison on March 15, 2029, was emotional and bittersweet. After spending her 20s behind bars for a crime she didn't commit, Emma emerged as a 34-year-old woman who had lost the prime years of her life to her sister's betrayal. "I never gave up hope that the truth would come out," Emma told reporters through tears as she walked out of the Michigan Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility. "I knew I was innocent, and I knew that someday science would be able to prove it. I just never imagined it would take 10 years, and that my own sister would be the one who destroyed my life." Emma's physical and emotional condition after 10 years in prison was heartbreaking. She had aged prematurely, suffered from severe depression and PTSD, and struggled to readjust to a world that had changed dramatically during her incarceration. She had missed her mother's funeral, her father's funeral, and countless milestones that most people take for granted. "Emma lost more than just 10 years," observed her attorney David Martinez. "She lost her youth, her health, her ability to have a normal relationship or family, and her faith in the justice system. The damage that Sarah caused goes far beyond the original murder. She destroyed Emma's entire life." But Emma's freedom meant that Sarah would finally have to face justice for her decade of lies and manipulation. On March 16, 2029, exactly one day after Emma's release, Sarah Whitmore was arrested at her home in Grand Rapids and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of perjury. Sarah's arrest was a dramatic scene that played out on live television as news crews captured her being led away in handcuffs from the home she had purchased with money from her father's estate. Unlike Emma's quiet dignity during her arrest 10 years earlier, Sarah screamed obscenities at reporters and claimed she was being framed by a corrupt justice system. "This is all lies," Sarah shouted as she was placed in a police car. "Emma is manipulating everyone just like she always did. She killed our father, and now she's trying to destroy me too. I'm the victim here." But Sarah's denials fell on deaf ears as the evidence against her continued to mount. The DNA evidence was unassailable. Her communications revealed her guilt and lack of remorse. An additional forensic analysis of the crime scene supported Emma's version of events rather than Sarah's. The trial of Sarah Whitmore began in October 2029 and became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Michigan history. The case attracted national media attention not just because of the shocking twin switch, but because it represented a landmark moment in forensic science and wrongful conviction advocacy. This case proves that our justice system, while not perfect, can ultimately deliver justice even when it takes years or decades, Prosecutor David Chun told the jury during opening statements. Sarah Whitmore committed the perfect crime by framing her identical twin sister, but advances in DNA technology have finally exposed her lies and given Emma the justice she deserves. Sarah's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Michael Stevens, faced an impossible task. The DNA evidence was conclusive, Sarah's communications were damning, and Emma's testimony about years of abuse and manipulation was compelling and consistent. Sarah Whitmore is not the same person who committed this crime 10 years ago, Stevens argued desperately. She was a young woman dealing with grief and trauma who made terrible decisions. She has spent the last decade trying to rebuild her life and contribute to society. Destroying her now won't bring back David Whitmore or give Emma her lost years back. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming. Emma's testimony was particularly powerful as she described years of psychological and physical abuse by her sister, the night of their father's murder, and the decade she had spent in prison knowing she was innocent. Sarah destroyed our entire family, Emma told the jury through tears. She killed our father, she framed me for his murder, and she tried to have me killed in prison to cover up her crimes. She has shown no remorse, no guilt, and no recognition of the harm she has caused. She is not the victim. She is a calculating predator who used our identical appearance to commit the perfect crime. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Sarah Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences for her fraud and perjury convictions. Sarah Whitmore has finally received the justice that should have been delivered 10 years ago, Judge Patricia Morrison said during sentencing. Her crimes go beyond the murder of her father. She destroyed her sister's life, manipulated the justice system, and showed a level of callousness and cruelty that defies comprehension. But Sarah's conviction was just the beginning of a broader reckoning with the failures that had led to Emma's wrongful conviction. The Michigan Attorney General's office launched a comprehensive review of the original investigation and prosecution, identifying multiple failures in procedure, evidence analysis, and prosecutorial judgment. The Emma Whitmore case exposed systemic problems in how we investigate crimes involving identical twins, and how we evaluate evidence of psychological manipulation and abuse, Attorney General Wilson admitted. We failed Emma Whitmore, and we failed the cause of justice. The case led to new protocols for investigating crimes involving identical twins, including mandatory advanced DNA testing when twins are potential suspects and specialized training for investigators on the psychological dynamics of twin relationships and manipulation. The Whitmore case has fundamentally changed how forensic science approaches identical twin cases, Dr. Lisa Chin explained. We now have the technology to distinguish between identical twins using DNA evidence, and we have better understanding of how one twin can manipulate and frame another. Emma Whitmore received a settlement of $5 million from the state of Michigan for her wrongful conviction, though she has stated that no amount of money can compensate for the decade of life that was stolen from her. She has become an advocate for wrongful conviction reform and advanced forensic DNA testing. I don't want anyone else to go through what I experienced, Emma said during her first public speaking engagement after her exoneration. Sarah may have taken 10 years of my life, but I'm going to use the rest of my life to make sure other innocent people don't suffer the same fate. Emma has also undergone extensive therapy to address the trauma of her wrongful imprisonment and her sister's betrayal. She describes the healing process as ongoing and difficult, but she expresses gratitude for the scientists, lawyers, and advocates who never gave up on proving her innocence. Learning to trust people again after being betrayed by my own identical twin sister is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, Emma reflected. But the people who worked to free me Dr. Chun, David Martinez, and so many others, showed me that there are still good people in the world who care about truth and justice. Sarah Whitmore remains in prison, where she continues to maintain her innocence and claim that she is the victim of a conspiracy. Prison psychologists report that she shows no remorse for her crimes and continues to blame Emma for destroying their family. Sarah has never accepted responsibility for her actions, said prison psychologist Dr. Janet Williams. She continues to view herself as the victim and Emma as the villain, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. She appears to be incapable of empathy or genuine remorse. The Whitmore case has also had broader implications for the study of identical twins and criminal behavior. Researchers are now studying how identical genetic makeup can produce completely different moral and ethical development, and how one twin can manipulate their identical appearance to commit crimes and frame their sibling. The Whitmore case challenges assumptions about genetic determinism and twin psychology, observed Dr. Moore. It shows that identical genetics don't guarantee identical behavior, and that family bonds can be corrupted by jealousy, greed, and psychological manipulation, just like any other relationship. As our investigation into the Whitmore twins case concludes, we're left with profound questions about justice, family, and the power of scientific advancement to correct even the most egregious wrongful convictions. Emma Whitmore lost 10 years of her life to her sister's betrayal, but her story ultimately became one of triumph over injustice and the power of truth to emerge even from the darkest circumstances. Her case has improved forensic science, reformed wrongful conviction procedures, and given hope to other innocent people who are fighting to prove their innocence. The Whitmore case proves that justice may be delayed, but it doesn't have to be denied forever, reflected attorney David Martinez. Emma's courage in maintaining her innocence for 10 years, combined with Dr. Chen's scientific breakthrough, shows that truth and justice can prevail even against the most sophisticated deception. Sarah Whitmore's story serves as a cautionary tale about the depths of human betrayal and the dangerous combination of intelligence, narcissism, and complete lack of empathy. Her crimes destroyed multiple lives and challenged the very foundations of family trust and sibling bonds. If this incredible story of betrayal and redemption has moved you as much as it has moved us, please like this video and share it to help raise awareness about wrongful convictions and the importance of advanced forensic science. Subscribe to Shocking Stories for more investigations that prove truth is often stranger than fiction, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail. Emma Whitmore may have lost 10 years of her life to her sister's lies, but she gained something even more valuable: the knowledge that truth and justice can triumph over even the most elaborate deception. Her story reminds us that innocence can be proven, wrongs can be righted, and that sometimes the most identical-looking people can have completely different souls.